I bet my position you'll fail." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Marcus Chen stood frozen in the doorway of the executive boardroom at Quantum Industries, watching the smirk spread across billionaire CEO Richard Caldwell's face. 23 executives in $1,000 suits turned to stare at the man in a maintenance uniform holding a mop bucket. Marcus was 36 years old and had been free for exactly 8 months. He never imagined his custodial job at America's largest tech conglomerate would land him here standing before the company's most powerful people as they stared at the impossible problem projected on the massive screen behind them. "Our entire security infrastructure is compromised," Richard continued, gesturing dismissively at Marcus. "6 months, $40 million. Teams from Stanford, MIT, Carnegie Mellon all failed. And you think you can fix it?" His laugh was sharp and cruel. "You're a janitor with a criminal record." The conference room erupted in uncomfortable laughter. Someone whispered loud enough to be heard. This is what happens when HR hires ex-cons. What none of them knew was that Marcus Chen had once been the ghost that tech companies feared most. At 19, he'd penetrated systems that were supposed to be impenetrable, not for money, but because he could. By 22, he'd exposed vulnerabilities in government networks just to prove they existed. At 25, the FBI caught him, and he spent 7 years behind bars for crimes he committed not out of malice but out of curiosity and a genius level. Understanding of code that most programmers would never achieve. YouTube +1. It started 15 minutes earlier when Marcus pushed his cleaning cart past the emergency board meeting. Through the partially open door, he heard fragments of panic. System breach. Millions in losses. No solution. Something about the technical jargon caught his attention, a specific pattern of failure that sounded eerily familiar. Without thinking, he knocked. The silence that followed his entrance was deafening. Richard Caldwell's assistant tried to usher him out, but Marcus spoke before she could touch him. "Your problem isn't in the firewall architecture. It's in the authentication protocol interacting with your real-time verification modules." The room went completely still. "Excuse me?" Chief Technology Officer Sarah Morrison leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "What did you just say?" "The breach," Marcus repeated calmly. "You're looking in the wrong place. The vulnerability is in how your systems communicate with each other, not in the external defenses." Richard Caldwell stood up slowly, his 6'4" frame designed to intimidate. "And you know this how, exactly? Did you learn cybersecurity from prison library books?" The room laughed again, but this time Marcus noticed Sarah Morrison wasn't laughing. Her eyes were locked on him with something that looked like recognition. "Mr. Caldwell," she said quietly, "maybe we should hear him out." "Absolutely not." Richard's voice was ice. "This is a multi-million-dollar crisis, not a charity case." "We have professionals who failed for 6 months," Sarah interrupted. What do we have to lose? Richard's jaw clenched. Then, slowly, that predatory smile returned. Fine. You want a chance? He turned to Marcus with barely concealed contempt. Fix this in 2 hours, and I'll promote you to the development team. Full engineering salary. But when you fail, and you will fail, you accept termination, with prejudice. No unemployment. No reference. Nothing. Marcus felt every eye in the room on him. The weight of judgment. The assumption of failure. The casual cruelty of a man who'd never faced real consequences for anything in his privileged life. 3 weeks ago, during a late-night cleaning shift, Marcus overheard 2 senior developers arguing about code vulnerabilities in the break room. He'd filed away the information mechanically, not thinking much of it. Then last week he saw internal memos in the trash about system anomalies that engineering couldn't explain. Piece by piece, he'd been unconsciously mapping the company's digital architecture just from fragments of overheard conversations and discarded documents. 2 hours, Richard repeated, checking his Rolex. Starting now. Marcus walked to the computer terminal at the head of the table. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. The first time in 8 years he'd been allowed near a system like this. His prison had taken everything from him. His career, his reputation, 7 years of his life. But it hadn't taken the one thing that mattered. His mind was still the sharpest weapon he'd ever possessed. As his fingers touched the keys, muscle memory flooded back. The room watched in silence as lines of code began flowing across the screen at impossible speed. Marcus wasn't searching blindly. He was following a very specific trail that most engineers wouldn't even recognize as significant. Interesting, he murmured, more to himself than anyone. You've got a recursive loop creating a backdoor every time your authentication system refreshes. Elegant, actually. Almost beautiful. Sarah Morrison moved closer to the screen. How are you seeing that? Our best analysts couldn't, because they were looking for an intrusion, Marcus said without breaking his rhythm. This isn't an attack from outside. Someone built a vulnerability into the system itself. From the inside, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Richard Caldwell's smile finally wavered. Just slightly. Just for a second. And in that moment, Marcus knew something the billionaire didn't know he knew. This wasn't incompetence or bad luck. This was sabotage. And somehow, the man who just bet his career was connected to it. If you're enjoying this story, consider subscribing to the channel, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about justice, power, and revenge. The question wasn't whether Marcus could solve the problem. The real question was, what would happen when he discovered who created it? 90 minutes into the 2-hour deadline, Marcus had mapped the entire breach architecture. His fingers moved across the keyboard like a concert pianist, each keystroke deliberate and precise. The boardroom had emptied except for Richard Caldwell, Sarah Morrison, and 2 board members who refused to leave, partly from curiosity, partly from disbelief. This is actually sophisticated work, Marcus said, his voice flat. Whoever built this backdoor understood your system better than your own developers. Richard leaned against the mahogany table, arms crossed. Fascinating commentary from someone who cleans toilets for a living. Sarah shot him a warning glance, but Marcus didn't react. He'd heard worse in prison. Words from men like Richard Caldwell meant nothing compared to what he'd survived. The code has a signature, Marcus continued, highlighting a section on screen, a specific syntax pattern, almost like a fingerprint. I've seen this style before. That was partially true. What Marcus didn't say was where he'd seen it 7 years ago. In a dark web forum where elite programmers discussed vulnerabilities they'd never exploit publicly. Back when he was still naive enough to believe that exposing security flaws made him a hero rather than a criminal. Richard's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and for the briefest moment something crossed his face. Not concern. Something colder. Calculation. Time's running out, Richard said, pocketing the device. Still think you can deliver, janitor? The emphasis on that last word was deliberate, cruel. Designed to remind Marcus of his place in the hierarchy at the bottom, where Richard believed all ex-convicts belonged. Sarah moved closer to the monitor. Marcus, can you actually fix this? Already did. He hit enter, and a cascade of corrections flooded the screen. The back door's closed. Your system is secure now. But what? Sarah asked. Marcus hesitated. This was the moment. The choice between keeping his head down and speaking a truth that could destroy him. The breach wasn't external, he said carefully. Someone with administrative access created this. Someone inside the company. The silence that followed was suffocating. Richard's expression didn't change, but his eyes went dead. That's a serious accusation. It's not an accusation. It's what the code tells me. And you expect us to believe that you, an ex-con with a history of illegal system penetration, discovered corporate sabotage in under 2 hours? Richard's voice was silk over steel. Sounds convenient. It sounds like exactly what someone would say if they were the one who created the problem in the first place. Marcus felt the trap closing. Of course. This was never about giving him a chance. This was about having a scapegoat. I have records of every keystroke you made, Richard continued, gesturing to the security camera in the corner. How do I know you didn't just plant evidence to cover your own involvement? You had access to our systems for 8 months. Plenty of time to cause damage. Sarah's face paled. Richard, that's exactly what a prosecutor would argue, Richard interrupted. An ex-hacker gets a custodial job at a tech company, creates a crisis, then conveniently solves it to look like a hero. Classic con artist behavior. Marcus's jaw tightened. He'd walked directly into this, the same way he'd walked into FBI custody 7 years ago, too confident in his abilities, too trusting that the truth would protect him. You've fixed nothing, Richard declared, striding to the monitor. Sarah, get security. I want him escorted out and his credentials revoked immediately. But Sarah wasn't moving. She was staring at the screen, her software engineering background allowing her to see what Richard couldn't. Wait. Richard, look at this timestamp. I don't need to look at anything. The back door was created 4 years ago, Sarah said, her voice sharp. Marcus has been here 8 months. The math doesn't work. Richard's face darkened. Then he had an accomplice. Inside help. This doesn't prove anything except that our security has been compromised, and he's the one who conveniently discovered it. Marcus realized with crystalline clarity that Richard wasn't interested in the truth. He was interested in control. In maintaining the narrative that someone like Marcus Spohr, criminal, disposable, could never be smarter than someone like Richard Caldwell III, born into wealth and educated at institutions that people like Marcus could barely afford to visit. I fulfilled your challenge, Marcus said quietly. The system is secure. That was the deal. The deal, Richard said with a predatory smile, was that you fixed the problem. But you didn't fix anything. You just created more questions, more problems. You failed. And according to our agreement, you're terminated. It was a masterclass in gaslighting, moving goalposts, rewriting reality in real time to ensure the outcome Richard wanted from the beginning. Sarah looked stricken. This isn't right. This is business, Richard snapped. Marcus Chen, you're fired. Security will escort you out. And if I find any evidence linking you to this breach, I'll have you back in prison within the week. 2 security guards appeared at the door as if summoned by telepathy. They'd probably been waiting outside the entire time, Marcus realized. This was always how this would end. As they gripped his arms, Marcus locked eyes with Richard. And he saw it, the faintest flicker of satisfaction, the pleasure of putting someone back in their place, of reminding the world that power always wins. But what Richard Caldwell didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that Marcus Chen had spent 7 years in prison learning patience, learning to read people, learning that revenge isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. And most importantly, learning that the most dangerous person in any room isn't the one making threats. It's the one staying silent, watching and remembering everything. As the guards pulled him toward the door, Marcus allowed himself one last glance at the monitor. At the code that told a story Richard didn't want exposed. The code that Marcus had already photographed with his phone before anyone arrived, because prison had taught him to always have insurance. Congratulations on your victory, Mr. Caldwell, Marcus said evenly. I'm sure you'll remember this moment. Outside the building, unemployed and humiliated, Marcus stood in the parking lot under harsh fluorescent lights. His phone buzzed, a number he didn't recognize. Marcus Chen? A woman's voice? Professional. Careful, who's asking? My name is Jennifer Brooks. I'm an investigative journalist with Tech Insider. Been researching quantum industries for 6 months. And I think you just became the most interesting person in this story. Marcus closed his eyes. The pieces were falling into place, but not the way Richard Caldwell expected, because men like Richard always made the same mistake. They assumed people beneath them had nothing. No connections, no resources, no capacity for strategic thinking. They forgot that sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't money or power. It's having absolutely nothing left to lose. Jennifer Brooks met Marcus at a coffee shop 3 blocks from Quantum Industries. She was 42, sharp-eyed, with the kind of exhaustion that comes from chasing stories nobody wants told. Her laptop was already open before he sat down. 7 years ago, you exposed vulnerabilities in military contractor systems, she said without preamble. The FBI painted you as a criminal, but your court transcripts tell a different story. You reported the flaws first. They ignored you. So you proved they were real. Marcus stirred his coffee, saying nothing. Richard Caldwell bought Quantum Industries 5 years ago, Jennifer continued, sliding a folder across the table. Since then, the company has had 17 major security breaches. Each time they blamed external hackers, paid settlements, kept everything quiet. But I've been tracking patterns. Marcus opened the folder. Financial documents, anonymous testimonies, security reports with sections redacted. Every breach corresponded with a major contract negotiation, Jennifer explained. Government contracts, specifically. Quantum would suffer a cyber-attack, demonstrate their new security solutions during recovery, then win massive federal deals. It's been a $400 million pattern. The implications hit Marcus like physical force. He's been staging the attacks. I can't prove it. Yet. But today, you walked into his boardroom and identified internal sabotage. On record, in front of witnesses, Jennifer leaned forward. Marcus, you just became the only person who can connect the dots publicly. You're also the perfect scapegoat he'll destroy to bury the truth. Marcus thought about Richard's face when he mentioned the code signature, that flash of calculation. He'd been so focused on solving the problem, he hadn't realized he was painting a target on himself. "Why are you telling me this?" Marcus asked. "Because I need proof. Real evidence." And you're the only person with the technical expertise to find it and the motivation to expose him. She paused, also because I watched my brother lose everything to a system that protects men like Caldwell while crushing people like you. He was a whistleblower. They destroyed him. I won't watch it happen again without fighting. There was genuine pain in her voice. Marcus recognized it, the kind of wound that never fully heals, only learns to breathe around the scar tissue. "I can't access quantum systems anymore," Marcus said. "I'm terminated." Escorted out by security. Jennifer smiled. Not warmly. That's what they think. "But you spent 8 months as invisible as furniture in that building. You know things nobody realizes, you know." She was right. During those months of cleaning offices, Marcus had memorized executive schedules, learned which managers left computers unlocked, discovered that the third-floor server room door malfunctioned every Tuesday during system maintenance. He'd accumulated information unconsciously. The same survival instinct that kept him alive in prison. Always watching, always cataloging, always prepared. There's someone else, Jennifer said. Sarah Morrison, your CTO. She's been raising concerns internally for months about quantum security practices, getting shut down every time. After today, she called me. Marcus straightened. Sarah called Jim. She said what happened to you was wrong, that Richard manipulated the situation. She wants to help, but she can't do it openly without losing her position. Jennifer pulled out her phone, showing Marcus a text. He identified internal sabotage in under 2 hours. That's either genius or inside knowledge. I'm betting genius. We need to protect him. For the first time since his termination, Marcus felt something other than defeat. Hope was dangerous, but having an ally inside Quantum changed everything. What do you need from me? Marcus asked. 3 things. First, I need you to document everything you saw in that code. Every signature, every timestamp, every anomaly. Create a technical report that proves internal sabotage. Marcus nodded. He'd already started that mentally. Second, I need you to identify who actually wrote that code. You said you recognized the style. That means somewhere in your past you've encountered this programmer. That was harder. The dark web forum where he'd seen similar work had been shut down years ago. Finding that person would require diving back into networks he'd sworn never to touch again, breaking his parole, risking everything. And third, Marcus asked. Jennifer's expression hardened. I need you to break into Quantum's secure archives and get me the original source code for every breach over the past 5 years. The stuff they don't report to authorities. The raw data that proves the pattern. That's corporate espionage. Marcus said flatly. I'd go back to prison for 20 years. Only if you get caught. Jennifer's voice was steel. And I'm betting you're better than that. Better than the FBI gave you credit for. Better than Richard Caldwell could possibly imagine. Marcus stared at his reflection in the coffee shop window. "8 months ago, he'd walked out of federal prison with a promise to himself, stay clean, stay small, stay invisible. Don't make waves, don't take risks. Just survive. But survival wasn't living. And watching Richard Caldwell destroy him without consequence wasn't justice, it was surrender. I'll need equipment, Marcus said quietly. A clean laptop, encrypted communication, and access to someone who still operates in the dark web communities. Someone who can help me trace that code signature. Jennifer reached into her bag and pulled out a brand new laptop still in its box, already handled. Encrypted OS installed. Routed through 7 VPN layers. Untraceable. She'd been counting on him saying yes. That should have bothered Marcus, but instead it felt like validation. Someone believed he was capable of more than pushing a mop. There's one more thing you should know, Jennifer said, her voice dropping. Richard Caldwell isn't just stealing money. His last 3 security demonstrations involve systems that protect critical infrastructure, power grids, water treatment facilities. He's proving vulnerabilities exist by creating them. If someone else exploits what he's exposed, people could die. Marcus felt rage crystallize into purpose. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This wasn't even about justice for himself. This was about stopping someone whose arrogance and greed had turned national security into a profit center. How much time do I have? Marcus asked. Richard's scheduled to present to the Senate Appropriations Committee in 6 days. He's pitching a $3 billion federal security contract. Once that's signed, he's untouchable. Jennifer's eyes held his. 6 days to gather evidence, build a case, and expose him before he becomes too powerful to stop. Marcus opened the laptop. His fingers trembled slightly as they touched the keyboard, not from fear, but from the electric recognition of purpose. He'd spent 7 years in a cage. 8 months being invisible. Now, finally, he had a chance to be who he actually was. Not a criminal, not a victim, but someone who understood systems well enough to dismantle them from the inside. Then we better get started, Marcus said. As Jennifer left the coffee shop, Marcus pulled up his old contacts from prison. Trevor Ghost Martinez, serving time for financial fraud but brilliant with blockchain forensics. Keisha Washington released 6 months before Marcus, who now worked in cybersecurity consulting. People who understood the gray areas between legal and necessary. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. They're watching you. Caldwell has private investigators tracking your movements. Be careful. SM Sarah Morrison. Already protecting him from the shadows. Marcus felt the old familiar sensation of pieces clicking into place. The same feeling he'd had 7 years ago, right before he changed everything. But this time he wasn't a naive kid trying to prove a point. He was a man who'd survived hell and learned patience. Richard Caldwell had made a fatal mistake. He'd assumed Marcus was powerless, desperate, broken. He'd forgotten that the most dangerous person isn't the one with everything to lose. It's the one who's already lost it all and has nothing left but their skills, their determination, and their absolute certainty that they're on the right side of a fight worth having. The war wasn't over, it was just beginning. And this time Marcus wasn't fighting alone. Day 5. Marcus sat in a rented storage unit converted into a makeshift command center, surrounded by monitors displaying cascading data streams. Keisha Washington worked on blockchain forensics while Trevor Martinez traced financial patterns from his apartment via encrypted video call. Sarah Morrison had provided admin credentials to non-critical systems, enough to map Quantum's network architecture without triggering alarms. Got him, Marcus said suddenly, his voice cutting through the silence. Jennifer Brooks looked up from her laptop. Got who? The programmer. The one who wrote the backdoor code. Marcus pulled up a comparison screen showing code signatures side by side. His handle was Phantom Key back on the dark web forums. Real name, Daniel Preston. And guess where he works now? Quantum Industries, Jennifer breathed. Senior security architect, reporting directly to Richard Caldwell. Marcus's fingers flew across the keyboard. And look at this, Preston's employment contract includes a $1 million bonus tied to specific federal contract acquisitions. The exact contracts that followed each major breach, the pieces weren't just connecting anymore. They were forming a picture so clear it was damning. That's motive, Keisha said from her monitor. But we need proof Caldwell orchestrated it, not just that Preston executed it. Marcus had been thinking about that for 4 days straight. The secure archives Jennifer needed were kept on an air-gapped system, physically isolated from any network, impossible to access remotely. Which meant someone had to go inside Quantum Industries and physically extract the data. Tuesday night, Sarah had texted him yesterday, server maintenance. Third-floor security protocols are reduced for system updates. You'll have a 40-minute window. Now it was Tuesday night, 11:47 p.m. Marcus stood across the street from Quantum Industries, wearing dark clothing and carrying a backpack containing custom hardware designed to clone hard drives in under 15 minutes. His phone buzzed. Sarah, security rotation just changed. 2 guards instead of 1. This is riskier than we thought. Marcus's heart hammered. Every rational part of his brain screamed to walk away. If caught, he'd face federal charges. 10 years minimum under the Economic Espionage Act. Everything he'd rebuilt would be destroyed. But then he thought about Richard Caldwell's smile when he fired him. The casual cruelty. The absolute certainty that people like Marcus didn't matter. Marcus crossed the street. The third-floor server room door still malfunctioned on Tuesdays. Sarah had been right about that. Marcus slipped inside, connected his cloning device to the archive server, and watched the progress bar crawl forward. 12 minutes. 13. 14. Voices in the hallway. Footsteps approaching. Marcus's blood turned to ice. Couldn't disconnect yet. The data transfer was only 70% complete. If he pulled out now, the entire mission failed. The door handle turned. Telling you, the environmental controls are glitching again, a security guard's voice said. Third floor always has issues on maintenance nights, then log it and let the tech team handle it tomorrow, another voice replied. I'm not spending overtime on HVAC problems. The footsteps retreated. Marcus exhaled slowly, watching the progress bar hit 100%. He disconnected, erased his digital footprint, and slipped out of the building like smoke. Back at the storage unit, the team worked through the night analyzing the extracted files. What they found was worse than any of them imagined. Jesus Christ, Jennifer whispered, staring at her screen. He didn't just stage breaches for profit. He sold the vulnerability information to foreign contractors, Chinese, Russian. He's been committing actual espionage. Marcus pulled up email chains between Richard Caldwell and Daniel Preston, not just discussing the breaches, planning them. coordinating them, calculating which systems to compromise for maximum federal contract leverage. This isn't white-collar crime anymore, Trevor said via video call. This is treason, economic espionage at the highest level. The FBI would crawl over broken glass for evidence like this. We need to move fast, Jennifer said. Richard's Senate presentation is tomorrow at 2 p.m. Once that contract is signed, this evidence becomes 10 times harder to use. Political pressure will bury it. Marcus looked at the mountains of data they'd compiled. Technical reports, financial forensics, email correspondence, timestamps proving Preston created vulnerabilities that Caldwell then exploited, foreign bank transactions, everything. We don't just send this to the FBI, Marcus said quietly. We make it impossible to ignore. Jennifer smiled. What are you thinking? Richard's Senate presentation is being live-streamed to stakeholders and press. It's public record. What if during his presentation someone released this information simultaneously to every major news outlet, every senator on the Appropriations Committee, and the FBI's Cybercrime Division? A coordinated information bomb, Keisha said, understanding dawning. While he's literally pitching his security credentials, the world learns he's been selling national security vulnerabilities to foreign powers. He'll be arrested before he leaves the Capitol building, Jennifer added, her journalist instincts recognizing the perfect story structure. The next day, Marcus sat in Jennifer's office watching the Senate hearing on multiple screens. Richard Caldwell stood at the podium in an expensive suit, radiating confidence and authority as he explained how Quantum Industries had successfully defended against sophisticated cyber attacks and deserved $3 billion in federal contracts. We've proven our resilience, Richard said to the assembled senators. Our security architecture is unmatched. We've faced challenges that would cripple lesser companies, and we've emerged stronger every time. At exactly 2:17 p.m., Jennifer hit send on 53 pre-written emails containing comprehensive evidence packages with airtight documentation. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Senators' phones began buzzing. Congressional aides rushed into the hearing room with printed documents, faces pale. News alerts started pinging across devices. The chamber erupted in confused murmuring. Mr. Caldwell, Senator Patricia Williams interrupted, her voice sharp. I'm looking at information that just reached my office. Can you explain why your senior security architect Daniel Preston created the vulnerabilities your company claimed to defend against? Richard's confident smile faltered. I'm sorry, what? These documents show internal emails between you and Preston discussing manufactured security breaches, another senator added, scrolling through his tablet, including the sale of vulnerability information to foreign entities. Is this accurate? Marcus watched Richard's face cycle through confusion, realization, and pure panic in seconds. His eyes darted to exits. His hands gripped the podium. That information is classified. Whoever released it committed what? Senator Williams cut him off. Exposed corporate espionage, economic treason, because that's what this evidence suggests. Security, please detain Mr. Caldwell until FBI representatives arrive. The hearing room exploded. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. 2 Capitol police officers approached the podium as Richard backed away, his million-dollar composure completely shattered. "This is a mistake," Richard insisted, his voice rising. "I built quantum industries, I secured federal systems. Someone is setting me up. The evidence includes your personal email correspondence," Senator Williams said coldly. "Your signature on financial documents transferring money to offshore accounts, and sworn testimony from your chief technology officer about your direct involvement in manufacturing security crises." Sarah had submitted her statement that morning. Protected by whistleblower statutes, Jennifer helped her file. Marcus watched Richard Caldwell, billionaire, CEO, untouchable power broker, being led out of the Senate chamber in handcuffs, his face twisted in disbelief and rage. Everything he'd built on lies and manipulation was collapsing in real time, broadcast to millions. His phone buzzed. "Jennifer, FBI just raided Quantum headquarters. Preston's in custody. It's over." But it wasn't quite over. Not yet. That evening, news outlets ran nonstop coverage. Tech billionaire arrested for economic espionage. Quantum Industries CEO accused of selling. Vulnerabilities to foreign powers. $3 billion federal contract canceled. Following shocking revelations, Marcus watched it all from his apartment, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Vindication. Not revenge, not triumph. Just the quiet satisfaction of seeing justice work the way it was supposed to. His phone rang. Sarah Morrison. "They're asking me to take over as interim CEO," she said, her voice shaky with exhaustion and relief. "The board wants to rebuild Quantum's reputation, distance ourselves from Richard. And Marcus, they want to offer you Daniel Preston's position. Senior security architect. Full benefits. Clean slate." Marcus closed his eyes. 2 weeks ago he'd been invisible, pushing a mop, trying to stay small. Now he was being offered exactly what he'd lost 7 years ago. A real career, respect, a future. "On one condition," Marcus said carefully. "Quantum establishes an employment program for people with criminal records. Real opportunities, not just custodial work. Second chances that actually mean something." Sarah laughed, and it sounded like hope. "I think that can be arranged." After they hung up, Marcus stood at his window watching the city lights. Richard Caldwell was facing 20 years in federal prison on multiple counts of economic espionage, fraud, and theft of trade secrets. Daniel Preston had already agreed to testify against him in exchange for a reduced sentence. Quantum Industries was being restructured from the ground up, and Marcus Chen, ex-convict janitor, man deemed worthless by society's standards, had taken down an empire of corruption with nothing but his skills, determination, and the unwavering belief that truth matters more than power. His parole officer called the next day. "You made national news." I had FBI agents in my office asking about your character. They wanted to know if you were a flight risk. What did you tell them? Marcus asked. I told them you're the only parolee I've ever had who showed up early to every meeting. Never missed a check-in and worked harder at a minimum wage job than most people work at their dreams. A pause. I'm proud of you, Marcus. You did something impossible. You won. Marcus thought about that word. Schwan. As if justice was a competition with winners and losers, but it didn't feel like winning. It felt like surviving long enough to tell the truth and finding people brave enough to listen. 6 months later, Marcus Chen walked through the main entrance of Quantum Industries, not through the service door with a mop bucket, but through the executive entrance carrying a tablet and coffee. Security nodded respectfully. Employees greeted him by name. The transformation still felt surreal sometimes. His office on the 7th floor overlooked the city, a view he'd only ever seen while cleaning windows. The nameplate on his door read, Marcus Chen, Chief Security Officer. Sarah Morrison had promoted him beyond even the position originally discussed. Recognizing that Quantum needed someone who understood security not just technically but morally. The company was unrecognizable from Richard Caldwell's era. Transparency replaced secrecy. Ethical practices replaced exploitation. The Second Chance initiative Marcus insisted on had hired 47 people with criminal records across departments from IT to management. Each one carefully vetted, properly trained, and given genuine opportunities to rebuild their lives. Morning briefing in 10, Sarah called from her office down the hall. She'd transformed as CEO, steering Quantum away from federal contracts entirely and toward ethical cybersecurity consulting for nonprofits and educational institutions. The company made less money but operated with integrity. Stock prices had actually risen once investors realized integrity was marketable. Marcus pulled up news footage from yesterday's sentencing hearing. Richard Caldwell, wearing a prison jumpsuit instead of Italian suits, receiving 18 years in federal prison for economic espionage, fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Daniel Preston got 12 years after his cooperation. Both would serve time in the same federal facility where Marcus spent 7 years, an irony not lost on anyone. Still watching that, Jennifer Brooks appeared in his doorway. She'd won a Pulitzer Prize for her investigative series on corporate espionage, turning the quantum industry's scandal into a national conversation about accountability, second chances, and systemic corruption. Just reminding myself it actually happened, Marcus said. It happened because you made it happen. Jennifer sat down, her energy still vibrant despite the whirlwind 6 months. Speaking of which, I have someone who wants to meet you. A young man, maybe 22, stepped nervously into the office. His handshake was uncertain, his eyes darting around like he expected someone to tell him he didn't belong. This is James Rodriguez, Jennifer explained. Released 3 months ago. Computer fraud conviction. Brilliant programmer. Nowhere will hire him. Marcus recognized that look. The weight of a record that defined you no matter what you did, the constant assumption of unworthiness. You good with Python? Marcus asked James directly. Yes. And C++, Java. Blockchain architecture, our cybersecurity team needs junior developers. Pay is $65,000 starting, full benefits, opportunities for advancement. You interested? James blinked like Marcus had spoken a foreign language. You're serious? Dead serious. Everyone deserves a second chance. I got mine. Now I'm passing it forward. Marcus extended his hand properly. Welcome to Quantum Industries. We'll start your paperwork this afternoon. After they left, Marcus stood at his window watching the city move below. His phone buzzed with a text from Trevor Martinez, now working as a financial consultant. 6 months clean, new job, apartment. Never thought I'd get here. Thank you. Similar messages came regularly from people whose lives intersected with his story. The custody officer who testified about Marcus's character got promoted. Sarah Morrison became a keynote speaker on ethical leadership. Even Marcus's parole officer wrote an op-ed about rehabilitation and second chances that went viral. But the message that meant most came that evening. An unknown number. You don't know me, but my son was released from prison last year. Couldn't find work anywhere. Your story gave him hope. He applied to your program. Starts Monday. I just wanted to say thank you for giving him something I couldn't. A future. Marcus saved that message. Printed it. Put it on his office wall next to the news clipping of Richard Caldwell's arrest. The two images represented opposite philosophies, one about crushing people to maintain power, the other about lifting people to share it. That night, Marcus met Sarah and Jennifer for dinner at the restaurant where Jennifer first outlined the plan to expose Richard. They'd come here weekly, processing the insanity of what they'd accomplished together. To impossible victories, Sarah raised her glass. To people who refuse to stay invisible, Jennifer added. Marcus thought about that phrase, invisible, for 8 months. He'd tried to disappear, convinced that survival meant making himself as small as possible. But survival without dignity wasn't living. It was just waiting to die quietly. I got an email from a law professor at Stanford, Marcus said. Wants me to speak to criminal justice reform classes about ethical hacking and rehabilitation. Me. Speaking at Stanford. You're a symbol now, Jennifer said, whether you want to be or not. The ex-con who took down a billionaire with nothing but skills and principles. It's a hell of a story. It's not my story anymore, Marcus corrected. It's everyone's who's been written off, counted out, and told they don't matter. I just happen to be the one who got a chance to prove them wrong. Later, alone in his apartment, a real apartment now, not the halfway house room he'd lived in for months, Marcus opened his laptop and started typing. Not code this time, words. A blog post about second chances, systemic barriers, and the difference between punishment and rehabilitation. He'd spent 7 years in prison learning that the system wasn't designed for redemption. It was designed for disposal. People like Richard Caldwell built empires on the assumption that people like Marcus were expendable, forgettable, unworthy of consideration. But here was the truth they never understood. Treating people as disposable doesn't make them worthless. It makes them dangerous. Because when you have nothing to lose, you have everything to fight for. And when you combine that desperation with genuine skill, integrity, and a support system that believes in you, you become unstoppable. Richard Caldwell tried to destroy him for being exactly what he was, someone beneath Caldwell's perceived social station. But in trying to crush Marcus, he'd created his own destruction. Because power without accountability is just tyranny waiting for exposure. And exposure in the right hands becomes revolution. Marcus's blog post ended with a question he posed to readers. What would you do if society told you your past defined your future? Would you accept that verdict, or would you fight to rewrite it? Within hours, the post went viral. Comments flooded in from people with records, people who'd been rejected, people who understood the weight of being judged for mistakes rather than potential. Each comment represented another person refusing to stay invisible. Three days later, Marcus received an invitation to testify before Congress about criminal justice reform and corporate accountability. The same Congress where Richard Caldwell once wielded influence now wanted to hear from the man he'd tried to silence. Standing in his office, looking at that invitation, Marcus thought about everything that led him here. The arrogance of youth that landed him in prison. The humility of survival that kept him alive. The chance encounter in a boardroom that changed everything. The people who believed in him when he'd almost stopped believing in himself. He tried to destroy Marcus for succeeding while being unworthy. But Marcus learned something Richard never could. True power isn't about crushing people beneath you. It's about lifting people up and discovering that together, you're all stronger than any individual tyrant ever could be. The best revenge wasn't destroying Richard Caldwell's career. It was building something better in its place. A company with ethics. A movement towards second chances. A proof of concept that redemption isn't just possible, it's essential. Subscribe to this channel if this story moved you, because change doesn't happen when people stay silent. It happens when ordinary people refuse to accept that they're powerless. It happens when someone brave enough to risk everything decides that truth matters more than safety. And it happens when we collectively decide that everyone, regardless of their past, deserves the chance to become their best possible future. Marcus Chen was an ex-convict whose society deemed worthless, but he was also a genius, a fighter, and proof that the most dangerous thing you can do to someone is underestimate them. Richard Caldwell bet his position that Marcus would fail. He lost everything. Marcus bet his future on doing the right thing. He won a life worth living. And that ultimately is the only victory that truly matters.